On May 21st, 1927, Charles A. Lindbergh became the most famous man in the world following his flight across the Atlantic. The trip from New York to Paris in a non-stop flight was the very first of its kind and earned international recognition. His flight of nearly 3,600 miles was an immense promotion to aviation and earned him the Medal of Honor. His fame was that much more bolstered when America idolized him as an ideal man. He was young, handsome, and humble. This made him the role model that Americans were looking for. He consequently remained in the spotlight throughout his life, and the focus on his personal life was followed to his marriage of Anne Morrow, daughter of the U.S. ambassador to Mexico. He became an influential political figure and continued his flying, but the public was equally interested in his mundane personal affairs. The world reacted the same way as the family, therefore, when disaster struck the Lindbergh household. On May 1st, 1932, the 20-month-old first child of the couple disappeared from his crib. Charles A. Lindberg Jr. was nowhere to be seen when his nursemaid, Betty Gow, entered his room to check on him. When police arrived at the scene, the most notable evidence of kidnapping that was found was a ladder in the nearby woods and a poorly written ransom note. The police had trouble finding leads on the case. Following the possibility of an inside job, the police questioned Violet Sharp, a maid of the Morrow household. She gave suspiciously contradictory accounts of her actions on March 1st. Before she was to be questioned a fourth time, she killed herself. The ransom demanded $50,000 from the Lindberghs in gold certificates. When the money was collected for delivery, the police recorded the serial numbers of the notes. The payment was delivered by John Condon to a shady man in a cemetery. After receiving the box of cash, he gave assurance that the baby was in good care. The next month, the child was found decomposing in the woods. The trail ran dry until over 2 years later, when a man named Bruno Richard Hauptmann used $10 of the ransom money to pay for gas. He was apprehended, and his house was searched. The police found thousands of dollars worth of gold certificates used to pay the ransom. More evidence was presented when Hauptmann was tried in court, and he was found guilty. Hauptmann was sentenced to death for the kidnapping and murder of Charles A. Lindbergh Jr. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was indeed the kidnapper and murderer of Charles A. Lindbergh Jr. The information of the Lindberghs' plan to stay in Hopewell, the location of the nursery, and the warped window through which Hauptmann entered came from Violet Sharp. The latter is determined from the necessity of Hauptmann to have an accomplice to explain how he had this information. Furthermore, there is the circumstantial evidence that she gave highly inconsistent alibis and killed herself before further questioning, which points to her involvement. More important than who gave the perpetrator this intelligence is who the receiver was. Hauptmann fit the suspect profile. Based on the style of the second language English, it is easily determinable that the writer was German. Hauptmann was also a carpenter, which meant that he had at least basic knowledge of how to build a ladder, like the one used in the kidnapping. This is far from damning evidence, but Richard Hauptmann also had a criminal record in Germany, which he lied about to hide from authorities. Suspicion was first aroused about Hauptmann when he paid for gas with a note that was used to pay the ransom. It would have been reasonable to think that some of the money would return to local circulation, but upon returning to his house, more than $14,000 worth of the ransom money was found. Hauptmann pointed a finger at Isidore Fish, who he claimed he received the money from. This was dismissed due to an undeniable lack of proof. Hauptmann's carpentry background is not enough evidence to pin him as the ladder builder. In searching his house, however, investigators noticed missing floorboards in the attic. This became key evidence when experts compared the pieces of the ladder to the remaining boards and concluded that it was highly likely that the ladder was built from the boards of the attic of Hauptmann's house. Additionally, sketches of the ladder were found in a notebook belonging to Hauptmann. It was determined that Hauptmann was indeed the writer of the ransom notes. Not only did numerous experts agree that Hauptmann's handwriting was the same found on the notes, they isolated words and letters so that the public could objectively see the glaring similarities. When the ransom was delivered, John Condon gave a description of the man he gave it to, which was sketched. Many people agree that Hauptmann matched this sketch. Evidence against the mainstream theory is that Lindbergh called his lawyer before the police. This fact is construed, however, because although it is true that he called the New Jersey State Police after his lawyer, he did in fact call the local police first. Another suspicious point made is that Lindbergh cremated the corpse of his son immediately after it was discovered. It is important to remember, though, the condition in which it was found. Authorities worked with the colonel to positively identify Lindbergh Jr., and it was reasonable that the family would have the remains cremated. In conclusion, there is too much evidence against Hauptmann to say he was not the kidnapper. Although there remain to be quite a few unanswered curiosities around the event, it would be imprudent to say that it was another person only to fill in the gaps. The first major use of forensics to determine the culprit was therefore successful.